Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a book review of some of my favorite books this year, some of the juiciest books I've read this year, and in no particular order. We're going to be starting with The Widow Who Died with Flower The Widow Who Died with Flowers in Her Mouth by Obinna Udenwe. And this is a book of short stories, although some of the characters in the stories are related, but each story can stand on its own. And I'm just going to be talking about some of the juiciest short stories from this one. And the first one is John 101. I think John 101. John 101, or The New Ridiculous Way to Commit Suicide and Be Famous. One of the major themes in this book is mental health issues. And while I was reading John 101, it reminded me of this Eminem song, Stan, that is the story about a delusional fan and Eminem, a fan that believes that, him and Eminem are buddies, and that is the same kind of mindset you see in John 101. John 101, the character here believes that he has, besties in all the positions of power. He constantly writes them, letters, writes Obama, writes the Senate, writes a lot of people. He writes them letters, with ideas on how they can make the world better. And most of the times when he takes the story to the post office, the addresses are not written out well. They are not written, the right addresses are not put on the letter, and because of this they can't send this letter. Eventually John becomes exasperated with waiting on the big wigs and his friends in high places to reach out back to him, and he decides to take matters into his hands that are going to force them to notice him. And he goes through with this elaborate plan to bring attention to his grouse with the government and with the people in power. And how he does this is very dramatic. He goes around making obituary posters and making making an alliance with agberos or hoodlums in the environment in his vicinity. And coincidentally, or should I say eventually, he gets the right address of all the people he wants to reach, all the people he has been trying to reach all this while, and he sends out letters informing them of his his decision to be a sort of social martyr, right? And this gets the government's attention, and they send the police to try to stop him. But because he has already consulted with these agberos or hoodlums, they provide him with protection. The government agents and the police and all that, they cannot reach him to stop him from carrying out his mission. John is eventually successful in sacrificing himself and making himself a sort of martyr in the most absurd way, and it incites a sort of riot and chaos, and that is where the story trails off, and we're left to imagine how that would have resolved, right? That is where the story stops, okay? And even though the story and the character was a bit cuckoo, right? I loved it. And now let's move on to the next. The next book on my list is The Condom and Other Stories by Chika Ike. From the title, you can tell that it's a short story. It's a book of short stories. And what I loved about it was the familiarity and the similarity. It was a bit familiar to stories that we heard growing up as children in Nigeria. This seemed like stories that you would have heard adults talking about, ear tingling, fear and goosebumps inspiring stories. And I really liked those kind of stories growing up. And so one of my favorite stories in this book is The Briefcase. I think it's titled The Briefcase, and it's a story about two men that are fighting over a briefcase. The setting is, I think, a petrol station, and people are waiting their turn to buy petrol. And it was like December, I think, when there's always fuel scarcity, and people were waiting their turn to buy petrol. And in the midst of the waiting, they realize there's a scuffle and an argument and a fight going on, and two men are claiming to be owners of a briefcase. when all is said and done and the onlookers cannot resolve who actually owns the suitcase, one of the men contending for the suitcase decides to go home to bring back substantive proof that he's the actual owner of the suitcase, or briefcase. And he jumps into his car after reassuring the people that his house is just around the corner. But minutes go by and then hours, and he doesn't come back. And eventually one of the onlookers decides to break open the briefcase to see what actually is inside, and this is when they find mutilated parts of a human. And the other guy contending for the suitcase starts to cry and raise an alarm and, you know, disavow his initial statement. You know, he's crying and saying, oh, it's not mine, I actually just stole it from that guy's car, you know. But nobody buys it anymore. And when the police guys come, when the police vehicle comes around, the onlookers hand him and the suitcase over to the policeman, and this is where the story ends. The next on my list is this beautiful book by Ibrahim Abubakar, When We Were Fireflies. And When We Were Fireflies is basically the story about Yari Malalo, who is, in my opinion, a troubled artist. He comes from this home where he has lost his father, and his mother has sleeping spells. She sleeps for weeks, you know, and no one can really tell what is wrong. And Yari Malalo, the inciting incident in this book is when Yari Malalo goes to a train station, and suddenly, as the train is incoming, he has flashbacks, and not just any flashbacks, but flashbacks of his past and previous lives. And in those lives, he was killed, he was murdered, and he goes on this, should we say, he goes on this exploration of his memories to try to piece together what happened. And that is essentially the story you'll be getting here. And there is a love story, and it is a beautiful book. You should read it. I don't know if I sold it, but let's move on to the next, because the day is getting darker. The last but not the least, and one of my absolute favorite books this year, is Karen Slaughter's Pretty Girls. Pretty Girls is a thriller that thrills, right? It is a dark book, and I found myself having to pause several times because of just how dark it was. Pretty Girls is the story of grief and what violence, you know, what violence does to a family, the lingering effect of violence. That is what I get from the book. So it is a story about the Carrolls, which is a family made up of, you know, the mother, the father, and 3 girls. But when their first daughter was in college, she got missing. Years go by, and the Carrolls cope in their different ways. For the father, he cannot, you know, take it any longer. He cannot take the pain and the anxiety and just being bothered by dark thoughts, and so he opts out of living. The mother just focuses on her other children and just decides to be there for them. And, you know, the youngest, I think Lydia was the youngest, she copes by, you know, doing drugs, and eventually got clean and just found a stable man, and you know, and had a daughter. But Claire, I feel like is the fulcrum of this story. I don't know if that is the word, but she's like the heart of the story to me. And she copes by playing it safe. You know, she gets safe grades, she doesn't push herself too much. She married a safe guy, and she thought that, well, my life will be, you know, relatively uninteresting, right? Relatively stable, only for her husband, the safe guy she married, to be murdered in a seemingly random act of violence. While all this is going on in Claire's life, there is a background story also unveiling. There is a missing girl that is about 16 years, the same age that her sister got missing all those years ago. And this new fresh loss, you know, ignites her own feelings of loss, ignites past, you know, trauma surrounding her sister's disappearance. And it is while she's going through her dead husband's things that she comes across so many secrets, so many filthy secrets of his. So Claire finds clips of young girls, you know, that are in torture kind of movies, you know, home videos, and one of them looks like the current missing girl, right? Dun, dun, dun. Even though, like most people who have been confronted with such a harsh reality and harsh brutal truth, Claire is initially in you know, shock and denial about this kind of what she's seen on her husband's computers. She eventually enlists the help of her younger sister, whom she has been estranged from due to this same husband, right? She enlists her help and they go on this trip, and so much is revealed, you know. Claire and her sister eventually come to the realization that they're not just dealing with one man's filthy dark secret, and that there might be a network of people involved in this, and people, and not just people, but people in law enforcement and what have you, people in positions of power. Okay, and this story just keeps giving. So that I did not give away too much of the story, and because it's already getting dark, I'm going to stop my video at this point. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.